Study 103. Study Session 4. Ethical Deontologism. Introduction. In this study session, we will examine what ethical deontologism stands for and the extent to which it offers a viable standard for determining the moral value of human actions. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to explain the main claims of ethical deontologism and discuss the general problem of deontologism. Ethical deontologism. Ethical deontologism refers to the ethical theories that deny all forms of consequentialism. The position is also known as non-consequentialism. It denies that whether an action is morally right or wrong is to be determined by an evaluation of the consequence or utility of actions. Speaking broadly, deontologists contend that the moral value of an action is to be determined by a consideration of its inherent nature or the motive behind it. In the opinion of deontologists, at least some acts are morally wrong in themselves, like lying, breaking a promise, punishing the innocent, and murder, irrespective of their consequences or utility for the agent or the people affected by them. Perhaps the most prominent advocate of ethical deontologism is Immanuel Kant. Others include W.D. Ross and H.A. Pritchard. Tip: ethical deontologism contends that an action is not to be determined morally right or wrong by an evaluation of the consequence or utility of actions. Rather, the moral value of an action is to be determined by a consideration of its inherent nature or the motive behind it. For a deontologist, whether an action is right or wrong is determined by a careful scrutiny of its inherent nature or underlying motive without any appeal to its utility or consequence. You are to carefully examine the essential nature of the action and all the relevant facts relating to the nature of the action, and simply decide or intuit whether the action is morally right or wrong. There are two variants of the deontological theories, namely the Act and the Rule versions. We will now discuss each of these in turn. Act-Deontologism. The extreme version of Act-Deontologism claims that we are to identify what is morally good, right, or obligatory. What is the morally good, right, or obligatory thing to do in each given situation, without appealing to any rule, or what will bring about a greater balance of good over evil for oneself or society as a whole. While some act deontologists contend that we are to decide on the moral value of a specific action after a careful consideration of the very nature of the action, without any consideration for utility or consequence, others affirm that we are to arrive at a determination of what is morally right or wrong, good or bad by intuition. A less extreme version of act deontologism allows that some general rules can be built up from particular decisions or intuitions on the moral status of actions, and these may be useful in determining what should be done in other similar cases in which we need to determine the moral status of actions. However, this position does not allow that a general rule may ever supersede a well-taken particular judgment as to what should be the morally right option in a given situation. Problems with Act-Deontologism. A major flaw of Act-Deontologism is that in real terms, it does not offer us any precise standard for determining what is right or wrong in particular cases. Particular judgments are seen as basic and general rules. If they are to exist at all, are to be derived from particular judgments. The position of the theory is that after being clear about the facts of a case, we form a judgment about what should be done either by some kind of intuition or decision. With regards to intuition, a problem is that anthropological, psychological, and daily empirical evidences do not support the existence of a faculty of intuition. Likewise, the Act-Deontologists who emphasize decisions fail to specify any principle or consideration to actually guide our moral decisions in given situations. All that is said is that we must carefully examine the facts of the case, without any consideration for utility or consequence, and then decide on the right course of action. Beyond this, Act-Deontologists insist there is nothing else to appeal to. We simply intuit, choose or decide on what to do. Act-Deontologist argues that each moral situation is unique and different in such a way that no general rule could be of any significant help in identifying what should be done, except as mere rules of the thumb. However, what they ignore is the fact that even though it might be true that each situation is unique, it is not true that it is unique in all respects, or that it cannot be like other situations in morally relevant respects. Indeed, events and situations are often very similar in relevant respects that justify us to apply the same general rule to them. Another problem with Act-Deontologism is that it is practically impossible to live without rules because we cannot always put in the time and effort required to judge each situation anew. Also, moral rules are needed in the process of moral education. For example, children are taught to discern between the morally good and the morally bad actions through the application of moral rules. In response to this criticism, an Act-Deontologist, especially one of the less extreme versions, might reply that the rules that might be appealed to are those arrived at by induction on the basis of past intuitions or decisions, and such generalizations can always be questioned and should never supersede any well-taken decision on any moral issue. Critics of Act-Deontologism also contend that particular moral judgments are not purely particular but sufficiently general to warrant the application of similar rules. Going by the position of Act-Deontologists, they claim that this is what X ought to do in situation Y does not entail what X or anyone else should do in similar situations. However, this position amounts to an inconsistency or the use of a double standard, because ordinarily, if we say that X should do Y in situation Z, we should be ready to say the same for other people in other sufficiently similar situations. What act-deontologists ignore is that moral and value, predicates such as good, bad, right and wrong, are such that if they belong to an action or object, they would also belong to any other action or object with similar properties. For instance, to say that I ought not to steal implies that everyone ought not to steal. If you judge that X is right, then one is committed to judging that anything exactly like or sufficiently like X in relevant respects is also right. Rule-Deontologism. Rule-Deontologists maintain that the standard of right and wrong consists of one or more rules. They, however, insist that these rules are valid independently of their utility or consequence. Contrary to the viewpoints of the Act-Deontologists, Rule-Deontologists affirm that these rules are basic and not derived by induction from particular judgments. Rather, judgments about what to do in specific cases are to be determined in the light of rules, with each rule stating that we ought to act or refrain from acting in a certain way in a given kind of situation. Two prominent examples of theories that fall under the rubric of Rule-Deontologism are the divine command theory of morality and Kant's moral theory. These are to be discussed in detail in subsequent lectures. But for now, it is sufficient to note that the rules advocated as a standard for determining the moral value of actions by the divine command theories are those commanded by God, while for Kant, they are derived from reason. Problems with Rule-Deontologism. An objection that is quite common against Rule-Deontologism is that there is no rule which does not admit of exceptions. Let us consider, for instance, the moral rule which specifies that it is morally wrong to lie. Ordinarily, this rule is generally subscribed to, but there are some instances in which one might be willing to make an exception to the rule and affirm that in such cases it will be morally wrong not to lie. For example, it might not be morally wrong to lie to a friend you know to be mentally deranged when he requests that you should lend him your rifle, that you no longer have it. The lie might be justified on the grounds that the deranged friend in question is likely to commit murder with the rifle. However, deontologists such as W.D. Ross contend that no moral rule allows for exception. Moral rules appears to have exceptions only when two moral rules conflict, and one seems to be more important than the other, and the less important one has to give way to the more important one. In an attempt to resolve the problem of conflicting moral rules, Ross came up with the dichotomy between prima facie duties and actual duties. Prima facie duties are the duties one has, everything being equal. That is, if other moral considerations do not intervene. prima facie duties in some situations may be outweighed by other more important obligations or higher rules of prima facie duty. Actual duties are the duties one has in spite of all other moral considerations that might be at play. As an example, the moral rule that it is good to always tell the truth, and the one that says that it is morally right to always do all we can to save an innocent life, may be in conflict. Let us imagine that a man being chased by hired assassins runs into your compound and quickly hides away in a dry well. On getting to your compound 5 minutes later, the assassins, not sure of their prey's whereabouts, ask if you have seen anyone running. Now, you have to make a moral choice between obeying the rule that you should tell the truth and the one that says you should save an innocent life. Going by Ross' distinction, one of these rules would represent prima facie duty and the other actual duty. A means of identifying which of the conflicting rules represents the actual duty is to rank them and identify which one is more important or priority. However, as deontologists, such ranking must not involve any consideration of utility. Rather, it might be determined by intuitively or arbitrarily identifying which is more basic than the conflicting counterpart. According to Ross, basic moral rules are self-evident and do not require the criterion of utility or any other criterion for that matter for their identification. General problems with deontologism. The deontological position in ethics affirms that it is possible to determine the moral value of an action without any recourse to the utility of the action in question. This is to be established by direct consideration of the relevant action or the rule underlying it. However, in practical terms, we normally take into account the utility of actions in the effort to determine their moral worth. Usually, the effects of a given action on the agent and other relevant stakeholders is crucial in the determination of whether an action is good or bad, right or wrong. Besides, the deontological standard might result in actions that will be described as inherently good, while it has very heinous social effects. And given the fact that morality is essentially a social enterprise that is designed to achieve a number of social ends, it is arguable that any principle that will be employed as a moral standard should have a positive social impact. In view of this, it is arguable that it does not make much sense to maintain that an action is inherently good without any consideration for its social effects. Study session summary. In this study session, we focused on the ethical deontologism, which affirms that the moral value of actions should be determined without any consideration of the utility of the actions. We also considered the distinction between act and rule deontologism. Act-Deontologism focuses on the inherent features of specific actions and on the basis This intuits or decides on their moral value. Rule-Deontologism concentrates on the rule underlying specific actions in the determination of the moral value of actions. Some of the problems with each of the variants of deontologism have also been examined. End of study session 4. Thank you for listening.